Luna was once a joyful golden retriever, always by the side of the family she adored. But one fateful night, everything changed. Abandoned by those she trusted the most, she was left alone in the cold streets of Guadalajara, with nothing but her fading hope to keep her company. For days, Luna wandered, lost, hungry, and afraid. Her heart, once full of love, now shattered. Just when it seemed like her story would end in heartbreak, a kind-hearted police officer named Clara stumbled upon her in the rain, offering her a second chance at life. But Luna's journey was far from over. Would Luna ever find a family to call her own again? Could she learn to trust after being so brutally betrayed? Or would her past continue to haunt her? Join us in this moving story of survival, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a dog and the people who refused to give up on her. The air in Guadalajara was thick with heat, the kind that clung to everything in the late December afternoons. In the quiet, residential neighborhood where Daniel and Sofia Morales lived, the usual hum of activity had faded, replaced by the stillness that only the holiday season could bring. But inside the Morales house, it was anything but quiet. Boxes were stacked high in every corner, the sound of tape ripping and cupboards closing echoed through the rooms. It was moving day. Did you pack the dishes? We can't leave anything behind. Sofia said urgently as she wrapped the last of the silverware in old newspapers. Daniel, sweating as he taped another box shut, glanced over at her. Yeah, I got it. Just making sure everything's sealed. Don't worry, we'll be out of here soon. His voice was calm, but his movements were rushed. Time was running out, and they still had plenty to pack before the movers arrived. In the middle of the commotion, Luna, their golden retriever, sat watching, her tail wagging happily from side to side. She could sense the energy in the air, the anticipation of something big happening. For her, it was just another adventure. Any time they packed boxes like this, it usually meant a trip, maybe to the park, maybe somewhere new. And wherever they went, Luna always went with them. Daniel, where's Luna's leash? Sofia called from the other side of the room, her eyes scanning the floor quickly but not really looking. Probably out on the porch with the toolbox. We'll get it later, Daniel replied, his focus entirely on sealing up the boxes and loading them into the car parked outside. As the minutes passed, the car filled up quickly, boxes of clothes, disassembled furniture, and everything they owned packed tightly. Luna trotted after Daniel and Sofia, following them from the house to the car and back again, patiently waiting for someone to call her to join them inside the vehicle, as they always had. But this time, no one called her. When the last box was loaded into the trunk, Daniel slammed it shut with a finality that echoed through the now empty house. The door was locked, the lights inside were turned off, and the keys were left under the welcome mat for the new tenants. Without a second glance, Daniel and Sofia climbed into the car. Luna sat at the top of the steps, her leash hanging loosely on the door handle, her tail wagging slower now. Her eyes followed them, filled with trust and hope. She waited, knowing that any moment they would call her, just like they always did. The car engine rumbled to life. She perked up, standing on her paws, ready to run to the door as soon as it opened. But the door didn't open. Luna watched as the car slowly pulled out of the driveway. The excitement in her eyes began to fade, replaced by confusion. The car turned the corner and disappeared from sight. She sat back down. They must have forgotten something, she thought. They always come back for her. After all, they loved her, didn't they? They always had. The hours passed, and the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the empty street. Luna remained by the door, her eyes never leaving the spot where the car had vanished. Occasionally, she would stand, her ears twitching at the sound of distant cars, hoping it was them returning for her. But as the darkness deepened and the streetlights flickered on, the realization slowly sank in, no one was coming back. Luna's tail stopped wagging completely. She lay down on the front steps, curling into a tight ball as the chill of the evening set in. All she had was the familiar old blanket she had carried with her since she was a puppy, now worn and frayed. She rested her head on it, her body trembling from the cold and confusion. The quiet street, once full of life and laughter, now felt like an entirely different world. A world where she didn't belong. The sounds of distant families enjoying dinner filtered through the windows of nearby homes, but none of those sounds belonged to her family anymore. There were no soft voices calling her in for the night, no gentle hands offering her food. The life she had known, the warmth and comfort of being loved, had vanished with the taillights of the car. And yet, Luna stayed. She stayed because it was all she knew. She stayed because she believed, with every fiber of her being, that they would come back for her. But they didn't. By the time the night deepened, Luna had stopped looking up at every passing sound. She closed her eyes, curling tighter into her blanket, her heart heavy with the weight of abandonment she didn't understand. The stars above twinkled, indifferent to her suffering. The world moved on around her, unaware of the loyal heart that had been left behind, forgotten. If you're enjoying Luna's story, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another inspiring story like hers. Your support is a way of thanking Luna for showing us the power of second chances. The sun rose slowly over Guadalajara, casting a warm glow on the city's narrow streets, but for Luna, there was no warmth to be felt. She had spent the night curled up on the front steps, her body stiff from the cold and her heart heavy with confusion. Her family hadn't come back. As the city around her began to stir to life, Luna finally stood, stretching her aching legs. Her eyes, once bright with hope, were now dull, clouded with uncertainty. She looked at the door behind her one last time, then down the empty street. She didn't know where to go, but her instincts told her she had to move. If she stayed there, no one would come. Luna padded softly down the driveway and onto the sidewalk, her paws making almost no sound as she walked. Her head hung low as she slowly began to wander through the neighborhood, sniffing the air for any familiar scents. There was no trace of Daniel or Sophia, only the strong smell of gasoline and food from the street vendors starting to set up their carts for the day. People passed by her without a second glance. Some hurried along to work, others chatted on their phones, but none of them stopped to notice the golden retriever with the matted fur and tired eyes. Luna weaved between them, her once wagging tail now limp, dragging behind her as she moved. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, a sharp reminder that she hadn't eaten since the night before. She followed the scent of tortillas frying in the distance, her nose guiding her toward the source of food. As she turned a corner, she spotted a small taco stand bustling with customers. Luna stood at a distance, watching the cook toss pieces of meat onto the grill. Her instincts told her not to approach, but the hunger was too much to ignore. She inched closer, her eyes fixed on the ground beneath the stand where tiny morsels of food had fallen. The street was loud, full of people talking, music playing from the nearby shops, but Luna only heard the growling of her stomach. She crept closer still, hoping to grab a piece of discarded tortilla, but just as she reached for it, the cook spotted her. "Largo! Get out of here," he shouted, waving a spatula at her. Startled, Luna jumped back, her heart racing. She turned and ran, her paws skidding on the pavement as she bolted down the street, away from the noise, the people, and the food she so desperately needed. Her legs carried her through the crowded streets until she found herself in a quieter part of the city, the noise fading behind her. She stopped in an alleyway, her sides heaving as she caught her breath. There was no food here, only the faint smell of trash and old rainwater pooling in the corners. Luna curled up next to a large dumpster, resting her head on her paws. Her stomach growled again, but there was nothing she could do. She had no idea how to survive on her own. Her world had always been one of warmth, with food given to her in a bowl, a soft bed to sleep in, and people who loved her. But that world was gone now, and Luna was completely alone. The sky grew darker as the hours passed, and soon the light drizzle that had been falling turned into a steady rain. Cold droplets soaked through her fur, chilling her to the bone, but Luna didn't move. She lay still, the rain blending with the tears that streamed from her tired eyes. As night fell once again, the streets of Guadalajara became even more desolate. Luna was now a shadow among the alleyways, invisible to the world that bustled during the day. She drifted in and out of sleep, her body too weak to stay awake, her mind too exhausted to understand what had happened to her life. Days passed like this, wandering aimlessly through the city, scavenging for food where she could find it, dodging cars and unfriendly faces. At night, she would find the darkest, quietest places to curl up, hoping that the morning would bring something better. But every morning was the same: hunger, fear, and loneliness. The once vibrant dog that had played in the Morales family's yard was now a shadow of her former self. Her fur, once golden and soft, was now matted and dirty. Her once lively eyes were hollow, filled with only a lingering sense of loss. It had been 5 days since she had last seen her family. 5 days since she had eaten a proper meal. The city was no place for a dog like Luna. She wasn't built for this kind of life. She had always been cared for, loved. Now, she was just another stray wandering the streets, hoping for scraps and dodging danger at every corner. On the 6th day, as the sun began to set once more, Luna found herself back in the heart of the city. The rain had returned, heavier this time, soaking her fur as she walked. The streets were quieter now, with most people seeking shelter from the storm, but Luna had nowhere to go. Her legs were trembling from exhaustion, her paws aching from days of walking. She needed to rest. Stumbling down a narrow alley, Luna found a small overhang where she could escape the rain. She lay down, her body curling into a tight ball. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes half closed. She was too tired to keep going, too weak to find more food. For the first time in her life, Luna felt the weight of hopelessness. She closed her eyes, her body heavy with fatigue. In the silence of the city's rainy night, she let herself drift into a deep, restless sleep, unaware that her life was about to change again. It was nearing midnight in Guadalajara, and the rain showed no signs of letting up. Officer Clara Torres drove slowly through the empty streets, her windshield wipers rhythmically swiping away the sheets of water pouring down. Patrols like this were routine, driving through the quieter areas of the city, keeping an eye out for anything unusual. She had seen it all in her years as a police officer: burglary attempts, lost kids, even the occasional runaway pet. But tonight, it was just the rain, relentless and heavy. As she turned into a narrow side street, something caught Clara's eye: a small, unmoving figure near a dumpster under a barely there overhang. At first, she thought it was just trash that had blown into the alley, but a second glance told her otherwise. It was a dog, huddled in a tight ball, soaking wet and shaking. Clara slowed the patrol car and pulled over to the side of the road. She turned off the engine, the silence of the rain taking over as she stepped out into the downpour. Pulling her hood up, she approached cautiously, not wanting to startle the dog. "Hey there," she called softly, crouching down a few feet away from the shivering animal. "What are you doing out here, huh?" Luna didn't move at first, her body too weak and her mind too foggy to react. She had long since stopped caring about the strangers who passed her by. But Clara's voice, soft and steady, was different from the others who had ignored her. Slowly, Luna raised her head, her eyes dull and lifeless, barely registering the woman in front of her. Clara's heart clenched when she saw the state the dog was in: matted fur, ribs visible under her thin coat, and eyes that spoke of nothing but exhaustion and abandonment. She took another step closer, reaching into her pocket to pull out a small sandwich she had packed for her shift. Gently, she placed a piece of it on the ground between them. "Here, girl. You must be hungry." Luna stared at the food for a long moment, her body trembling. She was too tired to care about much anymore, but the smell of food, even if faint, stirred something inside her. Slowly, she crawled forward, inch by inch, until her nose touched the sandwich. She sniffed it cautiously before taking a small, hesitant bite. "That's it, good girl," Clara whispered, her voice soothing. She watched as Luna ate the rest of the sandwich, although her movements were slow and weak. It was clear the dog had been on the streets for days, if not longer, and had survived on scraps or worse. Clara could feel anger rising in her chest. Whoever had let this happen to such a beautiful dog had abandoned her with nothing. And now, she was barely clinging to life. Once Luna finished the last bite, she looked up at Clara with wide, wary eyes. For a brief moment, the dog's tail twitched, though only faintly. There was still something left inside her, something that recognized kindness. But trust? That had been shattered. Clara knelt down carefully, extending her hand toward Luna. She knew better than to force anything. Dogs in Luna's condition needed patience and space. "It's okay, I'm not going to hurt you. We need to get you out of this rain." Luna sniffed Clara's hand, her breath shaky and hesitant. After a moment, she nudged her head against Clara's fingers, a sign of tentative acceptance. Taking it as a good sign, Clara reached for her radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Torres. I've got an abandoned dog on Calle San Martin, looks malnourished and injured. I'm taking her to the veterinary clinic on 12th Street. Can you notify them I'm coming?" "Copy that, Officer Torres," the dispatcher's voice crackled back. "We'll let them know." Clara's jacket was already soaked through, but she didn't care. Gently, she placed her arms around Luna and lifted her. The dog was so light, far too light for her size, and Clara could feel the dog's body trembling in her arms. "You're safe now," she murmured softly. As she carried Luna back to the patrol car, she felt the dog's head rest weakly against her shoulder. It broke her heart to think how long Luna had been out there, cold and alone. Opening the back door, Clara gently placed her inside, wrapping a blanket she kept in the trunk around Luna's wet, shivering body. Clara started the car, and the warmth of the heater slowly began to fill the vehicle. She glanced in the rearview mirror at Luna, who had curled up on the back seat, her tired eyes closing as the warmth surrounded her. For the first time in days, Luna was out of the rain and cold, and for a moment, her body relaxed. As Clara drove through the rain-slicked streets toward the clinic, her mind raced. She had always had a soft spot for animals, but this was different. This dog wasn't just lost, she had been abandoned, and someone had to answer for it. But first, she needed to focus on getting Luna the help she so desperately needed. The vet clinic was quiet when Clara arrived. The lights from the building shone through the rain, a beacon of hope in the dark night. Clara carried Luna inside, where the vet, Dr. Morales, was already waiting, having been alerted by dispatch. "What do we have here?" Dr. Morales asked, concern flashing in his eyes as he saw the limp dog in Clara's arms. "Found her in an alley," Clara explained, her voice tight with emotion. "She's been out there for a while, by the looks of it. I don't know how much longer she could have lasted." Dr. Morales nodded grimly. "Let's get her examined." They took Luna to the examination room, where the vet immediately began checking her vital signs. Luna lay still on the table, her body too weak to resist as the vet examined her injuries, her malnourished frame, the scrapes and cuts from her time on the streets, and her extreme dehydration. "She's in bad shape," Dr. Morales said softly, his hands moving gently over Luna's body. "But I think with some care, she'll pull through. We'll need to keep her here for a few days to monitor her condition and get her strength back up." Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Relief flooded her, but it was mixed with sadness. Luna had been so close to not making it. "I'll cover whatever she needs," Clara said, her voice firm. "Just make sure she's okay." Dr. Morales gave her a reassuring nod. "We'll take good care of her, officer." As Clara left the clinic that night, she felt a heavy weight on her heart. She knew Luna was safe for now, but the road to recovery would be long. Clara couldn't keep Luna, not with her demanding job, but she also couldn't let her fall through the cracks again. For now, all she could do was hope that Luna would survive the night and find the strength to trust again. Clara had seen too much pain in the world to let this gentle soul be another victim of it. The days following Luna's rescue were a blur of exhaustion and hope. Clara stopped by the veterinary clinic every chance she got, often between shifts or late at night, just to check on the dog she had found in such desperate need. Each time she arrived, she saw small signs of improvement. Luna was eating again, though only in small amounts, and her eyes had begun to regain some of the life that had seemed lost forever in the rain that night. Dr. Morales was optimistic, but he had warned Clara that Luna's recovery would be slow, both physically and emotionally. The vet had seen cases like hers before. Dogs that had been abandoned or neglected took time to trust again. And Luna, who had been through so much in such a short period, would be no different. "Luna's making progress," Dr. Morales said one evening as Clara stood beside the recovery table, gently stroking Luna's head. "But emotionally, she's still fragile. Her body may heal quicker than her spirit." Clara nodded, her fingers running through Luna's softening fur. She understood all too well how hard it could be to recover from trauma. Luna had been left behind by the people she trusted the most, and that kind of wound didn't heal easily. Still, Clara had a job to do and a life to maintain. As much as she had grown attached to Luna, the reality of her work as a police officer weighed heavily on her. She was often out on patrol for long hours, sometimes days at a time. Taking care of a dog in Luna's condition was something she couldn't fully commit to. It broke her heart to think about it, but Luna needed more than what she could give. With a heavy heart, Clara knew she needed to find Luna a permanent home, one where she could be loved unconditionally. As much as she wished she could be the one to offer that, her responsibilities as an officer made it impossible. So, Clara took a leap of faith. She decided to share Luna's story on social media, hoping that somewhere out there, someone would step forward to give Luna the life she deserved. The post spread quickly. Within days, dozens of people had shared Luna's story, expressing outrage at her abandonment and admiration for her resilience. Many were moved by the images of the once broken dog slowly coming back to life under Clara's care. But among the messages of support and offers to adopt Luna, there was one that stood out, one that made Clara's stomach twist with unease. The message was from Daniel, Luna's original owner. Clara's hand shook slightly as she read the message, the words blending together with a mix of disbelief and anger. Daniel claimed that he and Sophia had seen Luna's story online and had immediately recognized their dog. They wanted to come and get her, to bring her home where she belongs. Home? The word left a bitter taste in Clara's mouth. Luna had been abandoned by these people, left to fend for herself in the streets of Guadalajara. For days, Luna had wandered alone, starved and terrified. The image of Luna lying in that alley, soaked and trembling, was seared into Clara's mind. How could they call themselves her family? Clara's first instinct was to ignore the message. To block them and pretend they never reached out. But that wasn't her way. As a police officer, Clara knew the importance of fairness. She couldn't judge them without hearing their side of the story, even if her instincts told her these people didn't deserve a second chance. After a long night of thinking, Clara finally responded to Daniel's message. She agreed to meet him and Sophia the following day at the clinic, where Luna was still recovering. The next afternoon, Clara stood outside the veterinary clinic, her arms crossed as she waited. The sky was overcast, with the smell of rain hanging heavy in the air. She glanced down at her phone, the minutes ticking by slowly, until finally, a car pulled into the lot. Daniel stepped out first, followed by Sophia, who clutched a small purse tightly in her hands. They looked nervous, but Clara couldn't tell if it was from guilt or the anticipation of seeing Luna again. She kept her expression neutral as they approached. "Thank you for agreeing to meet us," Daniel said, trying to smile. "We were so worried about her. We didn't know where she had gone." Clara resisted the urge to snap at him. "You didn't know because you left her behind," she said, her voice steady but cold. "You abandoned her." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "It wasn't like that," she whispered. We thought we would come back for her. We didn't mean to leave her for so long." Clara's patience wore thin. She had seen too many cases like this, too many excuses from people who claimed they didn't mean to neglect their pets. But Luna had been on the streets for days, near death when Clara had found her. "I'm not sure Luna would understand your reasoning," Clara said, her tone sharp. "But since you're here, I'll let you see her." Daniel nodded, guilt washing over his face as Clara led them inside the clinic. They walked down the hallway in silence, the only sound the soft footsteps echoing off the tiled floors. When they reached Luna's recovery room, Clara opened the door, stepping aside to let Daniel and Sophia in first. Luna was lying on a soft blanket, her head resting on her paws. When the door opened, she lifted her head, her eyes landing on the familiar figures of Daniel and Sophia. For a moment, her tail gave a hesitant wag, as if she recognized them from a distant memory. But then, something changed. As Daniel and Sophia moved closer, Luna's body stiffened. Her tail stopped wagging. She shrank back, her ears flattening against her head, her eyes wide with fear. "Luna," Daniel called softly, extending his hand. "It's us, girl." But Luna didn't move toward them. Instead, she glanced over at Clara, who stood quietly in the corner of the room. The dog's eyes, filled with uncertainty, locked onto Clara's, and in that moment, Luna made her choice. Luna stood shakily and limped toward Clara, her movements slow but deliberate. She pressed her body against Clara's legs, seeking the comfort and safety she had found only in the woman who had saved her. Daniel and Sophia stood frozen, guilt and shame etched into their faces as Luna refused to return to them. Clara knelt down beside Luna, her hand resting on the dog's head. "She's scared of you," Clara said quietly, though the weight of her words hung heavily in the room. Sophia wiped away her tears. "We didn't mean for this to happen. Please, let us make it right." Clara shook her head. "You had your chance. Luna doesn't trust you anymore." Daniel looked away, shame and regret clouding his features. He knew Clara was right. Whatever bond they had shared with Luna was broken, shattered by the days she had spent alone in the rain and cold. After a long moment of silence, Daniel finally spoke. "I understand," he said softly. "We won't fight you on this." Clara nodded, relieved that they weren't going to push any further. "She deserves better." Without another word, Daniel and Sophia turned and left the room, their footsteps fading down the hallway. Clara let out a long breath, her hand still resting on Luna's trembling body. The door clicked shut, leaving Clara and Luna alone together once again. Luna looked up at Clara, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and relief. For the first time, Clara felt a deep connection with the dog, a bond built on trust and shared understanding. "You're safe now," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "I promise." If Luna's story has touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to never miss another inspiring story like hers. Your support is a way to thank Luna for showing us the power of second chances. A week had passed since Daniel and Sophia's visit to the clinic, and life had settled into a quiet rhythm for Luna. Her physical wounds were healing well under the care of Dr. Morales, but her emotional scars were still fresh. The fear in her eyes had softened, though it had not entirely disappeared. She stayed close to Clara during each visit, finding solace in the police officer's calm presence. Clara knew she couldn't keep Luna forever, despite the growing bond between them. Her life as a police officer was unpredictable, long shifts, emergency calls at all hours. It wasn't the right environment for a dog like Luna, who needed stability, attention, and, most importantly, a family that could give her the love and care she deserved. So, with a heavy heart, Clara posted another message on social media. This time, the goal was clear: to find Luna a permanent home. Not just any home, but one where she would be cherished and protected from ever feeling abandoned again. A few days later, Clara received a message from someone named Ricardo. He had seen Luna's story online and had been deeply moved. Ricardo, a quiet man in his early 40s, explained that he had recently lost his dog of 10 years, a husky named Rocco. His son, Cesar, who had just turned 6, had been devastated by the loss, struggling to cope with the empty space left behind in their home. "I don't know if Luna is ready for a new family," Clara wrote back. "She's been through a lot, and she's still learning to trust again." Ricardo responded with kindness. "I understand. If she's not ready, we won't push. But I'd like to meet her if that's okay." After a long pause, Clara agreed to the meeting. There was something about Ricardo's message, the tenderness and understanding behind his words, that made her think Luna might have a chance at happiness with him and Cesar. But Luna had been through too much for Clara to rush the decision. It would all depend on Luna. The day of the visit arrived, and Clara prepared Luna as best she could. The dog was still cautious around strangers, but Clara hoped that with patience, Luna might start to open up. The meeting would take place at a small park near the clinic, a quiet space where Luna could feel safe without the sterile environment of the exam room. Ricardo arrived with his son, Cesar, a small boy with big brown eyes and a shy demeanor. As they approached the park bench where Clara and Luna waited, Clara could see the quiet sadness in Ricardo's eyes, the kind that only comes from the loss of a deeply loved pet. Cesar clutched a framed photo of their late dog, Rocco, holding it against his chest as if it were a lifeline. "Hi, Officer Torres. Thank you for letting us meet her," Ricardo said softly, his voice filled with warmth. Clara gave a polite nod. "It's good to meet you both. This is Luna," she said, motioning to the golden retriever at her side. Luna's tail wagged weakly as she looked up at the newcomers, but her body language was hesitant, her eyes cautious. Cesar, standing close to his father, stared at Luna with wide eyes. He seemed unsure of what to do, still clinging to the picture of Rocco. Ricardo knelt down to his son's level, whispering something in his ear, and gently nudged him forward. "Hi, Luna," Cesar said, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara watched carefully as Luna's ears twitched at the sound of the boy's soft voice. Luna sniffed the air in Cesar's direction but didn't move from her spot at Clara's side. Ricardo and Cesar stayed where they were, not approaching too quickly, giving Luna the space to come to them. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Clara could feel her heart beating faster, her worry growing with each passing second. Maybe Luna wasn't ready for this. Maybe it was too soon. But then, Luna took a hesitant step forward. Her nose twitched as she approached Cesar cautiously. The boy held out his small hand, trembling slightly, and Luna sniffed it carefully. She took another step forward, her head lowering as if seeking comfort. Clara held her breath as Luna pressed her nose gently against Cesar's hand. Cesar smiled, a small but genuine smile that lit up his entire face. "Hi, Luna," he whispered again, this time with more confidence. Luna wagged her tail, a small, tentative wag, but a wag nonetheless. Clara felt a wave of relief wash over her. Luna was making the choice, just as she had when she had turned away from Daniel and Sophia. This time, though, it wasn't fear driving her. It was something else, a flicker of trust, a possibility of a new beginning. For the next half hour, Ricardo, Cesar, and Luna spent time together in the park. Clara watched from a distance as Cesar showed Luna the picture of Rocco, explaining in his small voice how much he had loved his old dog and how much he missed him. Luna listened, her eyes focused on the boy, as if understanding his grief in a way that only a dog could. Ricardo stayed close, his eyes never leaving his son or Luna. He didn't push for anything more, letting Cesar and Luna find their own way to connect. Clara could see the tenderness in his gaze, the quiet strength that told her Luna would be safe with him. By the end of their time together, Luna was resting her head on Cesar's lap, her eyes half closed in a state of peacefulness that Clara hadn't seen in her since she had rescued her. A few days later, after careful consideration and several more visits, Clara made the decision. It was time to let Luna go. The adoption papers were signed at the clinic, and Clara's heart was heavy, but there was also a sense of peace. She had done everything she could for Luna, and now it was Ricardo and Cesar's turn to give her the love and home she had been deprived of for so long. When the day came for Luna to leave with her new family, Clara knelt down beside her one last time. "You're going to be okay, Luna," she whispered, stroking her soft fur. "You've found your home now." Luna pressed her head against Clara's chest, and for a moment, Clara felt the weight of all they had been through together. But this wasn't the end, it was a new beginning, not just for Luna, but for the family that had found her. As Ricardo and Cesar led Luna to their car, Clara stood by the clinic doors, watching them leave. Luna looked back once, her tail wagging gently, as if to say goodbye. The car pulled away, and Clara felt a mix of sadness and joy fill her heart. Luna had come a long way from that rainy alleyway in Guadalajara. She had been abandoned, broken, and lost, but now she was going home. As the clinic doors closed behind her, Clara smiled softly to herself. Luna's story wasn't just about survival, it was about second chances, for both the dog who had been left behind and the family who had lost everything. Luna had found her place in the world again. And so had Clara.